Going through what I've selected out of the Landlord Tenant Code is going to give you a very good idea of what it's like to manage rentals. We're going to start with Section 5106, the rental agreement, term and termination of rental agreement. All right, so if you saw the Landlord Tenant Code and it's like a stack of papers like that, you might look at it and go, oh my God, like, I'm never going to understand this. But it's really, it's way more boring than it is hard to understand. It's got an index, it's, you know, it tells you, like, this section is for this. It's really not that hard. So when we start to read this, you'll see it's written in pretty easy to read language. So rental agreements, the term and termination of a rental agreement. All right, so no rental agreement, unless it's in writing, shall be effective for longer than 1 year. That's not hard to understand. Where no term is provided, a rental agreement for premises shall be deemed and construed to be for month to month. Right? Pretty easy. Nobody said there was a term. What do you assume? Month to month. All right. The landlord may terminate any rental agreement other than month to month agreements by giving a minimum of 60 days written notice to the tenant prior to the expiration of the term of the rental agreement. Not hard to understand, right? So, if you want to give your tenant notice and it's due March 1st, you need to back up 60 days, and that's when you can give them notice.
So you can't say they get in the contract for a year, and 30 days into it you go, well, I don't want to, I can, for whatever reason you want to get out of it. Can you give them a 60-day notice and terminate it? It's the 60 days before the end of that first year.
So, as the tenant, you enter an agreement that says, I'm going to rent this place for 1 year for this much money, and you pay whatever to move your stuff in. For the landlord then to be like, sorry, you got to go. It's unfair. Mm-hmm. So unless certain things happen, which we'll go over, you have to use that expiration.
So if you don't write that 60-day notice, it now turns into month to month after that?
After the lease expires, yes, it goes month to month.
On that 60-day notice, you have to get them to sign that they have received it or anything like that? How do you deliver that to them?
Either certified mail,
okay,
or certificate of mailing.
Okay.
Certified mail is, I don't know what it costs. Certificate of mail is peanuts, much, much cheaper. The other benefit to certificate of mail is they don't have to go to the post office and get it. So if you send it certified and they don't pick it up, they haven't been notified. All right. Where the term of the rental agreement is month to month, the landlord or tenant may terminate the rental agreement by giving the other party a minimum of 60 days written notice, which 60-day period shall begin on the first day of the month following the day of actual notice. So, what's today? February what? 6th. So, if you're on a month-to-month lease and you want to give your landlord notice of moving, you can say, here's my 60-day notice. And that 60 days would start March 1st. Got that?
Yep.
So it's just the difference between if you have a lease that's in the middle of a term and month to month is just that in one you have to pay attention to the expiration date of the lease, and in the other it's 2 full calendar months. All right. Fair housing. This is basically discrimination. No person being an owner or agent of any real estate house, apartment, or other premises shall refuse or decline to rent, subrent, sublease, whatever, based on race, creed, religion, marital status, color, sex, sexual orientation. Oops, sorry, I didn't pull that together. Gender identity, that's kind of a new one. National origin, disability, age, or occupation, or because the tenant or person has a child or children. You can't charge them more rent for those things. In case of discrimination under this section, the tenant may recover damages sustained as a result of the landlord's action, including, but not limited to, reasonable expenditures necessary to obtain adequate substitute housing. So, you might think to yourself, I wouldn't do that. Maybe you wouldn't. But it's in another slide. The landlord is not just you. So if you call whoever your maintenance man, and your maintenance man goes out on your behalf and snickers at the disabled transvestite who answers the door and says something rude about if you would lose 100 pounds, you wouldn't be pulling the rail out of the wall, you're screwed. Like, you need to know who is acting on your behalf. So, are these things people care about? Yeah, especially if you're being discriminated against. But let's talk about legal aid. Legal aid provides legal services to people who qualify for it for free. And they receive grant money from the government, and they have a budget for these things. Like, their job is to defend this, and they have money to defend it. And where is this? The disability, especially with like service animals, that's kind of a new thing, or at least a hot topic. So you might have a unit listed for rent, and you get a call from legal aid, but they're acting as a tenant. And they say, would you accept pets? And they try to trip you up. Now, I want you to think about something. If you're aware of how a business works with a budget, what normally happens when you're forecasting the next year? So let's say your department, you're running a department at your company, and you get $100,000 to run your show. And you get to the end of the year and you spent $70,000. And you think, yeah. Guess what happens to next year's budget? They change it from 100 to 70. So then you're like, oh man, I need to be using my money. And if your job was with that money to defend this stuff, you probably would look a whole lot better if you were out there in real world scenarios defending stuff. So if you're not getting enough action, you're like, I need to go find it. And I just told you that legal aid is looking for you. And that's just the way it is. Now, you don't have to be like, but you need to be careful.
So to answer that question, you take pets and say, I don't take pets unless it's a service animal.
Or you could, if you're just, now there's this is a deep topic, but you don't necessarily have to. If you have an apartment building and you say, this apartment building is pet-free, for whatever reason, like there just are no pets in this building, then you have a reason to say that this is a no pet zone. Like we have people with allergies in this building, and we just make sure that they're comfortable, whatever.
Just have to be consistent. You just can't.
Bam.
It has the
So-
same rules for everybody.
So here, check this out. So when I owned a property management company, I was the only all-white person. Okay? And I think our tenant base was probably less than 40% white. And we had a payment window. People come in and pay their rent, whatever. And if they're late, what do people do? Oh, can you waive the late fee, whatever. And sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. You just kind of look at the situation, how often they might ask, and make your determination. The day somebody said, I bet you waive it more for the white people, I was like, whoo! I was so mad. But you know what we had to do? I was like, here's the new policy. Nobody gets it waived. So it makes it consistent. And is that the fairest thing? I guess. What you don't want to do is you don't want to say, you're this, you're that, and I'm going to treat you different. Like, that's the whole objective. So, being consistent certainly helps in that regard, right? So, and you've got to think about that across the board. Just remember that you have to make policies. You need to write things down and say, this is how we do it. And just be consistent.
I have a question, and I don't want to try to sound like I'm splitting hairs, but going back to the maintenance guy scenario, where he says something, clearly rude and disrespectful to the tenant, but if you are not refusing to do the repair or...
Well, that's what I was saying. He was saying if you didn't pull the handrail, if you weren't so heavy, you wouldn't pull the handrail out of the wall.
Yeah, but I mean, he still fixes the handrail. I mean...
What if he doesn't? What if he doesn't? What if he comes back to what if he made a crazy remark about the person's weight and forgot to tell the office when he got back? That tenant could say, I remember that comment, and now I'm not getting my things fixed. Hello, legal aid. I was discriminated against.
But if you handling the whole maintenance thing to a property management, will be still liable, or is there any, how you can transfer those kind of risks to actual person who's doing it?
You are still responsible. Now, you have a layer in there, right? You hired somebody who is a professional. So let's say you hired somebody and they just turned out to be, I don't know, let's say they had one bad employee, and that bad employee caused an issue with your tenant, and that tenant is just on fire and looking for whoever. They're going to the property management company and to you, right? So what is your real liability here, like real world? So you say, I chose this property management company because of their reputation. I never heard anybody else complain about them. They have insurance. They seem professional. Like, what more could you really do, right? So chances are you're off the hook. But if it got to be a big issue, they might want to know a little bit more about your relationship with them and try to tie you into it. And they probably would have to prove some sort of negligence on your part. But you are still the owner and still responsible. Okay, that's pretty much it. Consistency and documenting your policy is big. I already explained this to you, a summary of the code. You need to give it to them. If you fail to do it, the tenant may plead ignorance of the law as a defense. All right.
Do you have them sign a thing saying, yes, I received it, and you have that slip of paper?
Yep, part of your lease.
Yeah.
So the landlord is the owner, the lessor, the sublessor of the rental unit, whatever. Any person authorized to exercise any aspect of the management of the premises, including any person who directly or indirectly receives rents or any part thereof. Any person held out by the landlord as the appropriate party to accept performance. I don't know what that is. Any person whom the tenant normally deals as a landlord. So if you send somebody out to collect rent, to them, that's the landlord. So really, anybody who's interacting with the tenant on your behalf is the landlord. Here's what you're obligated to do. Comply with the laws. Provide a rental unit that doesn't endanger the health, welfare, or safety of the tenants. Keep clean and sanitary the common areas. Make good repairs. This is important. Make all repairs and arrangements necessary to put and keep the rental unit and the whatever that word is thereto in as good a condition as they were or ought by law or agreement to have been at the commencement of the tenancy. So if the tenant took it in a certain condition, but it really wasn't supposed to be that way, like you have a garbage disposal and it wasn't working. If you give them a garbage disposal, it should work, right? So you're responsible for that. If you don't want to be responsible for the garbage disposal, take it out before you show it. Provide trash cans, things like that. All right. This is a little bit more in that. So the landlord may agree by conspicuous writing, separate from the rental agreement, that the tenant is to perform specified repairs, maintenance tasks, alterations. It has to be legit, like the work has to be performed by the tenant for the benefit of the rental unit. They have to be adequately paid, and the agreement entered into is not for the purpose of evading an obligation of the landlord. This does not mean that, like, woohoo, I get to give them the maintenance. Like, that's not a bad thing. If that's part of your agreement, that's fine. But you can't say, all right, tenant, you need to do the maintenance and, not pay them or whatever. Like, that's part of your deal. Like, you can rent this for $800 a month, and I don't want to be bothered. Let's see. All right, so this is a 15-day following receipt of notice. If there exists any condition that deprives the tenant of a substantial part of the benefit or enjoyment of the tenant's bargain, and their bargain is what they're paying for, their rental unit, the tenant may notify the landlord in writing of the condition And if the landlord doesn't remedy it within 15 days, the tenant may leave. So what would that be?
What about leaky roof?
Unless it's like leaking in a substantial part of the place, like their living room, their bathroom, their bedroom, like I can't go anywhere and I'm getting leaked on everywhere. That's substantial. And this is subjective.
Mm-hmm.
If they have a leak, you know, I mean, that's expected.
Mm-hmm.
So no biggie. But this is to kind of give you an idea of how quickly you need to react and to what. And it's a little surprising. It's very generous, I think. So if you rented a place and you couldn't use half of your apartment for a couple weeks, wouldn't that would feel like an eternity. If this is the tenant's remedy if the landlord doesn't do it. So if the landlord fails to repair, maintain, or keep it sanitary, 30 days from receipt of notice. That's how long you have it. So, and the landlord needs to initiate reasonable corrective measures within 10 days and remedy it within 30. So if you get notice of a leaky roof, you got 10 days to get off your butt and start, and you got 30 days to have it done. I think that's plenty of time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about reality here. How many landlords do you think go, I have that much time, and they take it?
Mm-hmm.
A lot. So think about what a turnover costs. If you treat your tenants like you're only worth me taking the max amount of time, they're not going to want to stay with you. They're not going to want to renew. Here's my opinion. So after you meet the tenant and you agree on the rent and they move in and you've had that personal interaction for a while, chances are you're not going out and knocking on their door and getting rent. They're either going to directly deposit it in your bank account, either like from their desktop, or walk into your bank and just deposit slip and pay it. Or they're going to come into your office, if you have one, or mail. But you really, after that initial time, you don't have much of an interaction. It's just, here's a check, here's a check. That's all they know. Like, they have a place to live and they keep giving you money. And what's, like, at that point, if they're paying you or paying someone else, it's all the same. Like, they're just paying that money. When they need you is when you make the difference. So if they call you at 2 a.m, this is your chance to shine. Like, this is like showtime. If that tenant calls you in the middle of the night, do you think that they're going, I just want to annoy him? No, they're probably, I mean, it could happen, but they're probably upset. They're probably scared. They're, you know, my heat went out. It's 2 a.m. What can you as a landlord do? Nothing. At 2 a.m, chances are. But if you take the call and tell them you understand and how important it is, and that you're going to put them as the first stop in the morning, you think about what just happened. Like, they now know that you're there for them. They weren't left wondering all night and mad. So what else can you do in that situation? Like, if it's a heats out situation, you know, I've got my 3 kids here and it's like -5. Well, you're not going to like call an HVAC company. You know, nobody's going out then unless you want to spend a whole lot of money. But we used to have like a room full of space heaters. Yep, we'll be out. I'll get somebody to come out and drop off some space heaters for you and keep you warm until we get it done. I guarantee you that if those are your practices, when they call, you answer, and you take care of things reasonably fast, that your relationship with them is going to save you a lot of money. And when else do you have the time to be special for them? None. Like, you're not going to like send them a thank you note every time they send the rent, right? Like, that's it. When they need you, be there. Essential services, 48 hours. So that's water, heat, electricity. Can you see that? Is this too small? Depends on the eye strength of the student here. All right, so I don't think I can make this any bigger. So this is the tenant's right to early termination. So as a landlord, you'll become familiar with this list because people who want to break their lease in the middle will try their best to fit into these scenarios. A fake letter from a fictitious employer who's having them move 30 miles away. So they can leave with 30 days notice if the tenant's employment with their present employer requires a change in excess of 30 miles. A serious illness of a member of the tenant's immediate family. So you look at this list and just know that they're going to read the list, and if they want to get out, they're going to try it. So you just need to try to make sure it's legit. Landlord's remedies for failure to pay rent. All right, so how many people here are familiar with the process if a tenant doesn't pay? Does anybody know? All right.
Well, I'm here. I haven't had that problem yet, so I'm lucky.
You have to give them
But
a
I'm
letter
gonna have
first.
Yeah.
You have to give them a letter.
Yes. So they do get a letter. So it's called a 5-day letter. And here's where there's confusion. So a 5-day letter is a letter you send out after the due date, and it says you have 5 days to pay or else. That gets confused with on the 5th day after rent is due, there's a late fee. So somehow those get kind of joined together, and people think that you wait 5 days until they're late, and then you send a 5-day letter telling them that they have a late fee because they're 5 days late. No. So, and what happens if you don't get this letter right, and then you try to take them to court? The judge goes, "What is that? Start over." So they were late.
Make sure your math's right, because you'll start over then too.
Yeah. So you were late. They were late with their rent, and then you sent them a letter, and then they didn't pay, and then you filed in court to get a court date, and then the court date's, let's say you're lucky and it's a month out, and then you get to court and you're scared as could be because it's your first time, and the judge goes, "What is that? Start over." And you're like, "Oh no!" And you think, "I already just lost all this time, and now I'm going to double it." So this stuff here is important. So any time after rent is due, the next day, you can send them a letter that says you're rent was supposed to be this much and paid by this date. You haven't paid, pay up immediately or else. And I'm not telling you what to write, I'm just telling you the gist of the letter. Then you can send them another letter that says, you have a late fee now, you need to pay that. You could wait until the late fee kicks in and then send them one letter that says, you have 5 days to pay up, and you also owe the late fee. And get your math right. Because the judge looks at it and goes, these numbers don't work. What are you saying? Like, you confused this poor tenant so bad, they don't know what to pay.
Does it matter calendar days versus business days?
Yes. It's business days. I think it's business days
For the late fee?
for the first week, and any time frame over a week is calendar days, I think. But it's in it's in the code. Like, I couldn't spend time to look it up. It's pretty clear. Like, I think it says time computations, like in the index, and explains it. But it goes from business days to calendar days at some cutoff. All right, so let me see. You can demand payment and notify the tenant in writing that unless payment is made within a time mentioned in such notice, to be not less than 5 days after the date notice was given or sent. That's where the 5-day letter comes from. The rental agreement shall be terminated. So that's what you're telling them. You don't pay in 5 days, we're done. But, if it's terminated, it's terminated. It doesn't mean anything. It's like your judgment. Like, you need to take it through court and really get them out of there. If the tenant remains in default, the landlord may bring action for summary possession, which is take them to court, and whatever other proper proceeding. All right. These are tenant obligations for the rental unit. Comply with whatever they're supposed to do for the city, county, state. Keep it clean and safe. Dispose of all ashes, rubbish, and garbage. Keep all plumbing fixtures used by the tenant as clean and safe as their condition permits. Like, would you think that would be the case? So what does that mean, like, in everyday terms? Your toilet is nasty. Like, seriously, that is gross. You need to clean that. Use in a reasonable manner. Plumbing, heating, electric, all that stuff. Don't willfully destroy, deface. Don't tamper with smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, all that stuff. So, basic rules.
So is this like you have to go by this list, or you can modify or like add or subtract and what?
So, in essence, you could take a cover sheet and staple it to the top of the code, and those are the rules. If you want to change the rules, they're not upheld by the court.
Going back to three the rules before. What happens if a tenant refuses to leave? Doesn't pay and refuses to.
So then you go for summary possession. So you take them to court, and the judge says, "Oh yeah, I see what's happening here. Tenant, you owe this rent. This is legitimate, and the landlord is asking for possession. Possession granted. So now the tenant has so many days to move out.
Are there cases where the judge might rule that the tenant should not move out?
Oh, sure.
What would those cases be?
They might be that the tenant made a good case that they just didn't understand, or they cried, or, you know. In JP court, you're not talking like lawyers on the bench. This could be some traffic cop that got the position, or anybody. Like, if you want to apply, apply. So, and then there's not like case law and stuff. Like, it's just like there's the code, and the judge goes, "Okay, I see. You know, this is what it says." But they might be swayed. Sometimes, I mean, because we had almost 400 units, right? So you can imagine, it was so funny. Like, when we would show up on Landlord Tenant Day, it'd be like, Ferris Properties, courtroom A, all others, courtroom B. You know, it would be like, everybody files in. So, depending on what judge you get, like, you're like, yay, or and it's the same stuff. And one judge just might be a little more sympathetic or a little harder. You don't know. We used to try to, in certain cases, when we were really nervous about the security deposit amount, especially in a large house with a lot of kids, and you're going, if there's like red juice all over this carpet, that's going to be a lot of money. So we're like, how do we get enough security deposit if you're limited to 1 month's rent? So we just thought, and we said, well, there's nothing that says that the rent has to be a certain way. Like, they can pay all 12 months up front. Why can't they pay, instead of 1/12 the first month, 1/6? And then the second month, and then like taper it down so that you're getting more money up front, so that you could see how they're taking care of the house. And if it's bad, then you can start like, hey, you're not taking care of my place according to this code. Some judges were like, no problem. Some judges were like, you can't do that. What? Am I in the same room? So, and that's a frustration for sure.
Is there a case where
Did somebody eat that still? I just lost my clicker. Oh, here it is. Sorry. You said what's that?
Is there a case where maybe the tenant has nowhere else to go, or that type of thing, so you can't kick them out, or it's,
No.
or they're in a situation where you can't, kicking them out would be just.
Nope. And that's part of life, I guess.
Okay.
You as the landlord can only accept so much responsibility. Like, you don't have to pay for housing a tenant who can't afford your place. Was there another question?
I just had a quick question. Can you limit the number of people in the, like, you have a 2-bedroom apartment and they want to move 10 people in there or something like that? I mean,
There's
I
occupancy.
know it's fire code, but
That's basically, you'll go by whatever the code is for where you are.
code fire. Okay.
Yep. And it also states, like, if it's a single parent with kids, right, and it's a 2-bedroom, 2 girls, okay, a boy and a girl, okay, up to a certain age. So it's pretty specific.
Okay.
So the tenant's obligation relating to defective conditions. So this is, what does a tenant have to do if they recognize something is wrong with the house that needs to be fixed? Any defective condition of the premises which comes to the tenant's attention and which the tenant has reason to believe is the duty of the landlord or another tenant to repair shall be reported in writing by the tenant to the landlord as soon as practicable. The tenant shall be responsible for any liability or injury resulting to the landlord as a result of the tenant's failure to timely report such condition.
Is email considered in writing these days or not?
That's where I'm going with this. So, you open yourself up to the communications you want to accept. Now, all right. So, you go to court and you say, tenant hasn't paid me. And of course, the tenant's trying to figure out how to stay. Well, they don't fix anything. What are you talking about? Well, I told you that this and this was broken and this was broken. That whole thing just gets ended. The judge will say, can you show me in writing where you reported that to the landlord? I texted him. Wait a minute. That's not in writing. Like, that's in text. So if the tenant goes, well, look, we've texted a few times in the past. Open yourself up to text being legitimate communication. Same thing with email or Facebook, I guess, or whatever, right? So you just really need to be careful with what you're going to accept. Now, the other thing is that it's their responsibility. So if they don't tell you about a roof leak that turns into a big problem, you could say that they're liable. You could go for it. But how a judge would rule in that case, kind of hard. All right. Tenant's obligation to permit reasonable access. So this is basically you're allowed to go in there with 48 hours notice. Let me see. The landlord shall not abuse the right of access, nor use it to harass the tenant. The landlord shall give the tenant at least 48 hours notice of the landlord's intent to enter, except for repairs requested by the tenant, because that is their invitation to come in. If they report something, you don't need to notify them. And shall enter only between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. So you can always do what you have to do. Security deposit. This is a big one. All right. So no landlord shall require a security deposit in excess of 1 month's rent, where the rental agreement is for 1 year or more. Doesn't say for 9 months or 10 months. That's one way around. Let's see. I really don't. We wouldn't have time to go through all this, and it's a lot of blah blah blah.
I got a question.
This one's important.
When they give you your security deposit, like heard different stories, where is that money supposed to go?
Well, we're there right now. Each security deposit shall be placed by the landlord in an escrow bank account in an FDI-insured bank with an office that accepts deposits within the state. So what was that? The Orange Bank. So if you wanted to have one of those bank accounts, there had to be a branch. There are ING branches. Couldn't use them.
You can just go into your bank and ask for an escrowed account, is what you're saying?
Right. So some people say, well, do I need a separate escrow for each unit, for each tenant? No.
So you just need one.
Some people do. But
Because I don't have their security deposits in an escrow account.
you should.
I know that now. That's fine. Someone told me that, and somebody else said it just has to be in a separate account, like not in your personal stuff. Like I have it in a separate account, but it's in an escrow account.
Oh, that's your escrow account. It needs to be in a separate bank account.
Like you said, a separate savings account.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
That is fine.
Yep. So here's the thing you can't do. You can't use that money.
I know. Yeah.
So, and if the tenant asks you where it is, you need to tell them. So, let me see here. The landlord shall disclose to the tenant the location of the security deposit account if they ask. The security deposit principal shall be held and administered for the benefit of the tenant, and the tenant's claim to such money shall be prior to that of any creditor of the landlord, including but not limited to bankruptcy. So that money, if you get in trouble, can't be touched. It's really just for that. So that's like protection for the tenant. All right, so here's how the security deposit money gets allocated. To reimburse the landlord for actual damages caused to the premises by the tenant which exceed normal wear and tear. So if you need to paint, is that normal?
Yeah.
You'd have a hard time saying it's not. But sometimes it's way beyond normal wear and tear. So here's my recommendation. Before they move in, get your phone, video. Saves a lot of trouble, a lot of arguing in the end. And then the second use, if it's not all used up by that, to pay the landlord for any rental arrearage, including late fees and stuff. And then third would be to reimburse the landlord for any expenses incurred in renovating and re-renting due to premature termination. So the important thing here is 1 year. Keep it in an escrow account, and you can't use it for anything else. And then it goes for damages and then back rent.
When it says that you have to show the tenant the location, what does that mean?
So, if for some reason a tenant wants to know where the security deposit is, you just have to say it's at Wisfis Bank.
That's it?
Yeah, my branch is whatever, if you want to give them the branch.
What is, they couldn't verify it.
That's all you have to tell them. Let's see. Where a tenant is required to pay a fee to determine the tenant's creditworthiness, such fee is an application fee. A landlord may charge an application fee not to exceed the greater of either 10% of the monthly rent or $50. So when you take an app fee, well, first of all, don't feel like the $50 is like too much or the 10% is too much. People are used to paying that. Like, you don't have to be shy about it. If you get a tenant report, it could cost $50 per person, and this would be per person. So if I have to pull credit and criminal reports and do background checks, landlords, whatever, that's easily $50. Like the hard cost would be like $25 for the reports, and then some time for somebody to work on it. That's.
Was that $50 per adult tenant, or somebody
So,
has a 16-year-old?
Yeah, so 18 or older, because this is saying creditworthiness, right?
Okay.
But it would behoove you to do criminal background checks, even if it's on your own dime, in certain cases. And you just, all right, look, if you've ever had somebody in your house and the kids are dealing drugs, or the grandkids are living with grandma and dealing drugs, man, it is a nightmare sometimes. And, maybe you could prevent that by pulling the credit or criminal report and seeing that the grandson has been arrested 3 times. You know what I mean? I mean, I could tell you story after story about drug busts in our units. It's a mess.
And when you do the background check and you find out the grandson's got 3 arrests, can you tell them, sorry, I'm not going to rent it to you because of the background check? You can be honest, you can't. They can't.
Oh, yeah.
You can't be discriminating.
Yeah, but here's the thing, right? So up front, you're like, here's my business, and here are the conditions in which we don't accept based on criminal history. So in ours, it was violent crime, drug dealing drug dealing. If somebody got caught with possession of marijuana, we didn't care. But if they were dealing it, we cared. Who cares about a DUI? Fraud, we weren't good with that. And then you got to think also, like for us, aside from our maintenance guys, it was women in the office showing and doing things. Like you don't want to. Like, you just really need to be careful about who your tenants are. Let's see.
So you're saying before you even show the rental unit to them, you might run a background check on them?
No, not before you
that's
show
what
it,
you
but before they actually move in. When we did showings, it was usually if our person showing the unit wasn't totally comfortable, one of the maintenance guys would meet out there with them. All right, so here's something important. Within 20 days after the termination or expiration of the rental agreement, the landlord shall provide the tenant with an itemized list of damages to the premises and the estimated costs of repair for each, and shall tender payment for the difference between the security deposit and such costs of repair to the premises. So, you got 20 days to come up with your list of itemized repairs and costs that you're going to deduct from the security deposit and get that back to the tenant. Or, failure to do that within 20 days from the expiration shall entitle the tenant to double the amount wrongfully withheld. So you got to be on top of it.
So what if it exceeds, can I still put a bill to the tenant, if it exceeds the security deposit, it becomes negative?
Well, you have 20 days to get that to them. But if it exceeds it, then they, where does it say? It says where was it? Double the amount wrongfully withheld. So if you weren't wrongfully withholding it.
No, I'm talking about the cost exceeds.
Right. So then in that case, you weren't wrongfully withholding it. Then you need to get a judgment to get it. But there's nothing, according to this, there's nothing that you wrongfully withheld.
But in reality, what is the picture? Forget about it kind of thing?
You could, but I wouldn't mess around with it. I would send them a letter and say your balance is 0, because if there ends up being a time where you need to go to court, what if they're not moving out, or I don't know, whatever, if they want to sue you for something, you just don't want that to be part of their argument. Well, he doesn't do things. Look, he didn't even tell me about this.
No, he's saying the damages to the unit exceed the security deposit.
Right. So then there isn't.
So you wouldn't say you owe $500.
There's nothing wrongfully withheld. So there's nothing to double and give back to the tenant. So let's say the tenant was due $100 back within 20 days, and you didn't give them that letter within 20 days. It took you 25, and the tenant goes, you know what? Instead of that 100, you owe me 200.
What I'm talking about, my cost, like I inspect and see like it cost me $200 to fix it. So what I'm going to do, like.
Oh, I see. So you're not saying if the accumulated amount is above the security deposit. What you're saying is afterwards, if it ends up costing you more, yeah, you can take them to court. You know, it's a whole new court case.
But I can still send the bill, right? That it's
Yes.
negative, like it's more.
That's all that. Pet deposits. No landlord may require a pet deposit in excess of 1 month's rent, regardless of the duration of the rental agreement. A landlord may require it, and damage to the rental unit caused by an animal shall first be deducted from the pet deposit. Where the pet deposit is insufficient, such damages may be deducted from the security deposit. A pet deposit is subject to subsections blah 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 down here. You can't require a pet deposit if it's a support animal. And if this here says that the landlord may increase the security deposit commensurate with the rent, if the increase of security deposit will exceed 10% of the monthly rent, payment of the increased security deposit shall be prorated over the term over 4 months. So if your rent amount is going up, you can increase the security deposit amount.
Have you ever had experience like trying to get rid of cat smell?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really,
Many
really?
many times.
Is it impossible?
It's the smell of money. No. I love buying houses that are hoarder houses and cat houses.
Really?
Because normally people are like, oh.
Yeah.
All right. Grounds for evicting. Tenant unlawfully continues in possession or any part of the premises after the rental agreement is over. They wrongfully fail to pay rent. They wrongfully deduct money for rent. They breach a lawful obligation relating to the use of the premises. Another holdover. So they stay there when they shouldn't. Tenants convicted of a Class A misdemeanor or a felony which caused or threatened to cause irreparable harm to any person or property. So you have your list of things that you can terminate for. So here's what's important. The communication that you send to the tenant needs to be right. And I want you to think about what I'm going to tell you in relation to the dollar amount that this could cost you. So if you don't send the 5-day letter properly, it can easily cost you an extra month. You're lucky if it only costs you a month of lost rent because of having to go back and do it over. So let's just say that's $800 lost. On the Del Rio website, there is a package of landlord documents that you can buy. It's like $450. The attorney who drafted them is the attorney who drafted the Landlord Tenant Code. His name is Michael Morton, and he does a lot of stuff for us. So I said, Michael, can you produce something that landlords can just buy and use in their business and know that they're getting it right? So he did. And you get the document, like a sample letter, and it has references to the code and everything, and then with each letter is an explanation of when and how to use the letter. So this might be...
I looked at it last night.
Did you?
Yeah. Then you can also sit down for like an hour for like $100 or something like that.
Yeah. So if you're really going to do it, I recommend that you make that investment. I mean, and that's why I said in light of what you could lose, that's the price tag on it, $450. But it's communications for them being disruptive and all kinds of things. So it's all in there.